There's another round of saber rattling coming from the U.S. side of this North Korea crisis. The U.S. Navy involved in exercises all this week in the waters off the east and west of the Korean Peninsula, including the USS Michigan nuclear-powered submarine, which can be equipped, we are told, with as many as 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles, and reportedly could have on board a special force team that could take out the North Korean leadership if need be. All told, we're talking about 40 ships from the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet involved, featuring the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, as well as destroyers, fighter jets, other aircraft, all running maneuvers with the South Korean military. Erica, the North Korean regime has called these exercises a rehearsal for invasion.
As a pretty blunt message to us and to them. And as you just said, they remain defiant. So how has North Korea responded? With more anti-U.S. rhetoric this weekend?
Absolutely. Over the weekend, the propaganda machine of the North Korean regime working overtime. The state news agency of the government of Kim Jong-Un branding President Trump a war merchant, a strangler of peace, claiming that by selling or giving weapons to South Korea and Japan, he is creating a hair trigger situation on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, the Pyongyang government are responsible for multiple missile launches and nuclear tests. They even went so far, according to our sources on the ground, as dropping anti-President Trump leaflets from balloons sent over from North Korea. Some of the propaganda even landing around the capital of Seoul. That's one reminder, Eric, of how close everything is on that Korean Peninsula. And that's a place that President Trump will be coming to in the coming weeks.
A nuclear war could break out any minute. That warning from North Korea's deputy ambassador to the United Nations.
The situation on Korean Peninsula, where the attention of the world is focused, has reached the touch-and-go point. A nuclear war may break out any moment.
He told a UN committee Monday that his country has been subjected to, quote, an extreme and direct nuclear threat from the United States. The deputy ambassador also warned that all of the North American mainland is within their firing range. Things have been more than tense between the U.S. and North Korea thanks to increasingly tough UN sanctions and the war of rhetoric between President Trump and Kim Jong-Un, trading insults like Rocket Man and mentally deranged. The president has ruled out talks with Pyongyang, but Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said just a few days ago that diplomacy will continue until the first bomb drops. At a meeting with Japanese officials in Tokyo, Deputy Secretary of State John Sullivan also expressed hope for diplomacy while acknowledging it might not work.
We must, however, with our allies in Japan and South Korea and elsewhere, to be prepared for the worst should diplomacy fail.
Vice President Mike Pence did his part to assure Japanese representatives that the U.S. is ready and able to stand up to North Korea.
The United States of America will continue to bring the full range of American power to bear on the regime in Pyongyang, as we hope to achieve through diplomatic and economic means a peaceable solution.
All this happening as the U.S. and South Korea begin joint military exercises off the Korean Peninsula involving fighter jets and warships.
As the pressure increases on the north, an official visiting Russia says nuclear weapons are necessary to protect their sovereignty. Vice Chairman of North Korea's Supreme People's Assembly, Anton Chun, met Russian Upper House Speaker Valentina Matvienko in St. Petersburg. The delegation presented a statement to Matvienko by leader Kim Jong-un that may suggest further military provocations. The Russian official is believed to have urged the North to begin dialogue with the United States and other countries.
我们说过，半岛局势现在还是处于一个非常
At the moment, the situation on the Korean peninsula remains highly sensitive and tense. If this kind of situation persists, it would not serve the interests of any party, especially countries in the region. In view of this, we hope that all relevant parties can exercise restraint and strive to make the current situation move towards the direction of abatement and the resumption of dialogue, instead of doing the opposite.
With tensions on the rise between the U.S. and North Korea, as well as other scenarios which could lead to a nuclear conflict, many are wondering what would happen in the case of an actual outbreak of nuclear war. To discuss this possibility, I'm now joined by Stephen Starr. He's a senior scientist at Physicians for Social Responsibility. Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Stephen, I'm going to ask you right off the bat, the use of nuclear weapons, you've been hearing it like the rest of us. It's been put on the table by a number of countries, including the U.S. and some of its allies. Tell us what would happen in a scenario like we're seeing in North Korea, where perhaps we'd have maybe a limited amount of warheads used in a fight as compared to a full-out global nuclear war. Is there actually a difference between the two?
Well, of course, there's a difference in terms of the numbers and the size of the weapons. I would question the idea that any nuclear war will necessarily remain limited, however. There's China is next door to North Korea, and they may not be happy if nuclear weapons start going off.
So what could we expect once these weapons go off? Let's say it's a doomsday scenario. We're at home, be it here or someplace in the northern hemisphere, a Western country. We're in nuclear war. What does that look like?
Well, I recently wrote an article for the Federation of American Scientists called Turning a Blind Eye Towards Armageddon. And I think if I had one thing to say that people need to understand is that strategic nuclear arsenals represent a self-destruct mechanism for the human race. Some of the world's leading scientists have done studies that show that the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war would essentially make it impossible to grow food crops. So most people and animals would starve. I'm not convinced that the leaders of the nuclear weapon states are fully understand this. None of them have ever publicly acknowledged or discussed these studies or this level of threat. We just hear about, winning a war lately.
We've seen a lot of, it's interesting, the Silicon Valley execs buying up properties in New Zealand. I'm talking to my friends, people are saying, well, you got to head down to Uruguay or to the tip of Argentina if a war breaks out, because supposedly the nuclear winter will stay mostly to the north of the equator. Is that a true scenario, or are we looking at it's going to be just bad no matter where you are on the planet?
Well, it would probably, if there's a large-scale use of strategic nuclear weapons, and those are the weapons that the nuclear weapon states have. The U.S. and Russia have about 94% of them, but China's got some extremely large weapons too. What happens is when a nuclear weapon goes off, it creates this immense firestorm, and hundreds of square miles can be, on fire, ignited instantly. And the smoke from these firestorms, if there were hundreds or thousands of those, would put many millions of tons of smoke above cloud level into the stratosphere, where it would form a global stratospheric smoke layer. And the studies that I referred to have found that up to 70% of the light in the northern hemisphere and 35% in the southern hemisphere would be blocked. It would cause below freezing temperatures every day in the central U.S. and central Eurasia for up to 2 years. It would be impossible to grow food crops for up to 10 years or longer. So people in the southern hemisphere might not have that same degree of cooling, but they certainly would have a very hard time obtaining food. In that sort of post-war scenario, everything's going to be completely chaotic, and so I don't really believe there's any real. The solution is not to run away and hide. The solution is to prevent nuclear war.
And really, truly, that is. I mean, I think that's the big picture. But when you have so many people in this world right now running our planet, the people are starting to think. I know people that you'd never think would be prepping are actually prepping. So what do you say to people? What do you say to people such as myself, or to citizens of the world? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do if this goes down? What recommendations do you have for us?
What we need to do is to ask our leaders to publicly acknowledge and discuss the environmental consequences of nuclear war. This is something that's just been avoided for decades. It's because it's never discussed, then there's very little awareness of it. I personally don't think that the political or military leadership in the United States is fully aware of this. I the article I mentioned in the Federation of American Scientists is, I have a good friend that has been told that the U.S. Nuclear Weapons Council, the people, includes the head of Stratcom, have publicly said that, they have said that they reject the idea of nuclear winter, that it was disproven. So it makes it clear that they're not aware of these studies. And, I think the biggest problem is that as long as people treat nuclear weapons like conventional weapons, with the idea if you have more than somebody else that you can actually win a war, then they miss the point that nuclear arsenals really, once you get up to 200 or 300 weapons dropped on a country, you're going to wipe out that country. The U.S. has 300 cities of populations of greater 100,000. Russia has 200. And, each side has 1,000 strategic nuclear warheads they can launch in 2 to 15 minutes. So, if we get into some kind of major war scenario like that, then there really is no place to hide.
That's a good night, Irene, for all of us, I guess. Not a good scenario. No place to hide, no place to go. A worst case scenario maybe is like making it through the blast and starvation then kicks in globally. Just, there's nothing positive here, is there?
There's not much, but I mean, the positive is that, we've reduced nuclear arsenals from 65,000 to about 15,000 today. And there was an awareness for a long time that nuclear war should not be fought because it can't be won. And I do think that, with the internet and organizations like yours that are willing to discuss this, people can become aware pretty quickly. We need to tell the presidents of all the countries with nuclear weapons, the leaders, that we do not want a nuclear war. That should be the starting point of any discussion on nuclear weapons, is that nuclear weapons threaten not only civilization, but the existence of most peoples and nations. So, and not just stop. We need to stop counting numbers of weapons and we have to have these consequences of nuclear war as the main focal point.
Stephen, thank you so much for sharing this message with us. I think it's something very important for all of our viewers to know and beyond, obviously. This is not a good scenario, and it's hopefully someplace that will never have to be, not in our lifetimes or our children or anybody in the future of this planet. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.